The app on my phone was called Family Hub Connect, and I had installed it 18 months earlier for the most boring reason imaginable, to see if we were low on eggs before I left the grocery store parking lot. I never expected it to be the thing that ended my marriage. I was sitting in the parking lot of my own design studio on a Tuesday afternoon in March, waiting for a client to reschedule a call, when I opened the app out of pure idle habit. And there, buried under the temperature logs and the grocery suggestions, was an activity tab I had never once clicked. Door access history, 31 days of entries, and every single one of them said the same thing. Door opened 3:11 a.m., door opened 3:14 a.m., door opened 3:09 a.m. Every night, within a 5-minute window, someone in my house was opening that refrigerator while I was asleep upstairs beside a man who swore on his mother's life, that he slept like a corpse and had not woken up in the middle of the night since college. My name is Renata Voss, and until that Tuesday in March, I believed I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. No 9-year marriage is perfect. But a good one, built on the kind of quiet, unglamorous trust that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only notice when it's gone. I co-owned a small interior design firm in Asheville, North Carolina, called Kessler & Rowe, named half for my maiden name and half for my business partner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priscilla Odom, who had been my best friend since design school. My husband, Desmond Voss, was a project manager for a regional construction firm, the kind of steady, dependable job that paid the mortgage and let him coach our neighbor's kids' rec league soccer team on Saturdays. He was not flashy. He did not have a corner office or a magazine profile. He made dinner on Wednesdays because it was his night. He remembered to defrost the chicken, and he fell asleep by 10:30 every night like clockwork, usually with a true crime podcast murmuring in his earbuds until the battery died somewhere around midnight. That was the man I married. That was the man I thought I knew. I stared at that access log for a long time before I did anything else. My first instinct, the generous one, the one that still belonged to a woman who trusted her husband, was that it had to be a glitch. Smart appliances misfired all the time. My sister's smart doorbell once recorded a raccoon as a package delivery for 3 straight weeks, so I scrolled further back, past 31 days, into February, into January. The pattern held. Not every single night, but close to it, 4 or 5 nights a week, always somewhere between 2:50 and 3:20 in the morning, always for exactly the same short window, as if whoever it was knew precisely what they wanted and did not linger. I sat in that parking lot with my thumb hovering over the screen and felt something cold settle low in my stomach. The specific, unmistakable feeling of your life quietly rearranging itself around a fact you have not yet been told. That night, I did not say anything. I made dinner. I asked Desmond about his day. I listened to him complain about a subcontractor who kept showing up late to a job site off Tunnel Road, and I watched him the way you watch someone when you are trying to memorize whether you have ever really seen them before. He looked the same. Broad shoulders starting to soften slightly with age, sandy hair he kept a little too long because I liked it that way, the small scar above his eyebrow from a bike accident when he was 12 that he told me about on our 3rd date. He looked like my husband. He also, for the first time in 9 years, looked like a stranger wearing my husband's face, and I could not explain the difference except to say that once you know to look for a lie, you start seeing the outline of it everywhere, even in a man's laugh. I waited until he fell asleep. I lay in the dark beside him, listening to his breathing slow and even out, feeling like a spy in my own bed, and at 11:40 I got up under the pretense of getting water and checked every door and window in the house. Everything was locked. There was no sign of anyone else, no shoes by the back door that weren't ours, no smell of anything unusual. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself there had to be an explanation as simple as him getting up to use the bathroom and grabbing a snack on the way back, forgetting entirely the way people forget the small mechanical facts of their own bodies. I almost believed it. I almost let it go right there, in the dark, in the version of my life where I trusted him by default. Almost. Instead, I set an alarm for 2:45 and put my phone face down on the nightstand, screen dimmed, and I did not sleep at all. I lay perfectly still, matching my breathing to his, listening to the house settle around us the way old houses do, little creaks and ticks that meant nothing until thaw. Tea night when every single one of them sounded like a footstep. At 2:58, Desmond's breathing changed. It was subtle, the kind of shift you would never notice unless you were straining every nerve in your body to notice it. A held breath, a slow exhale, and then the mattress rising slightly as his weight lifted off it. I kept my eyes closed. I felt him pause beside the bed, and for one unbearable second, I thought he was looking at me, checking whether I was really asleep, and something in me went very still and very cold. Because a man who checks whether his wife is asleep before he moves is a man who does not want to be seen. I heard him leave the room. I heard the hallway floorboard by the linen closet creak the way it always did, and then the soft, careful sound of him descending the stairs, skipping the third step from the bottom because we both knew, that it groaned loud enough to wake the dead. I gave it 30 seconds. Then I got up, and I did not turn on a single light. I moved through my own house like an intruder, my heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and I stopped at the top of the stairs where I could see a sliver of the kitchen through the railing. The refrigerator door was open, throwing a rectangle of pale light across the tile floor, and Desmond was crouched in front of it, moving with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a man who had done this so many times his hands no longer needed his eyes. He was not eating a midnight snack. He was packing a canvas grocery bag, the reusable kind we kept folded under the sink, and he was filling it with things I recognized instantly because I had bought them 2 days earlier at the Ingalls on Merriman Avenue. A rotisserie chicken, still mostly whole, a block of cheddar, a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, juice boxes. We did not have children. We had never had children, not by accident and not entirely by choice either. A long and complicated grief I will not get into here, but there were no juice boxes in that house that belonged to us. And yet there they were in my husband's hands, in my husband's bag, at 3 a.m, going somewhere I could not see. I did not confront him that night. I want to be honest about that, because I know some people watching this will think I should have marched down those stairs and demanded an answer right then, and maybe a braver version of me would have. But I have learned, in the months since, that the smartest thing I did in this entire ordeal was resist the urge to explode in the moment I had the least information. I went back to bed. I lay there and listened to the back door open and close so softly it was almost silent, a sound calibrated over what must have been months of practice, and I listened to him come back upstairs 11 minutes later and slide back into bed beside me, his side of the mattress cold from the March night air, and I pretended to be asleep while my husband, breathing evenly, fell back into whatever peace allowed him to do this and still coach soccer on Saturdays. I did not sleep again that night. I lay there running through possibilities the way you run your tongue over a chipped tooth, unable to stop even though it hurts. A brother in trouble, hiding from something that Desmond was quietly feeding. A friend who had lost a job and was too proud to ask directly. Some strange, benign explanation that would let me keep the life I had built. But juice boxes kept snagging in my mind like a hook. Juice boxes meant a child. And a child, at 3 a.m, being fed groceries in secret through the back door of my house, meant something my mind did not want to finish constructing. So it built the wall itself, brick by brick, and refused to let me see past it until I had proof. The next morning I did something I am not proud of, and something I would do again without a second of hesitation. I called in sick to my own studio, told Priscilla I had a migraine, and I drove to a security store out near the airport, the kind of place with bars on the windows that sells cameras to landlords who don't trust their tenants and spouses who don't trust their spouses. I bought a small camera disguised as a phone charging block, the kind that plugs into an outlet and looks like nothing at all, and I bought a second one shaped like a Bluetooth speaker, because I wanted 2 angles of that kitchen, and I did not want a single blind spot where Desmond could tell me later that I hadn't really seen what I thought I saw. I installed them myself that afternoon while he was at work, my hands shaking so badly it took me 4 tries to get the charging block camera angled correctly toward the refrigerator and the back door. I remember standing in my own kitchen, in the house we had bought together 6 years earlier, the house where I had painted the trim myself because we couldn't afford a contractor yet, feeling like a criminal in my own home for the crime of Juan. Ting to know the truth about it. I told myself that if I was wrong, if this turned out to be his cousin's kid, if there was some explanation that didn't gut me, I would delete the footage and never mention it and feel foolish and relieved in equal measure. I wanted, more than anything in those hours, to be wrong. I was not wrong. That night I set my alarm again, and this time I did not even pretend to sleep. I lay in the dark with my phone under the covers, the brightness turned all the way down, watching the live feed from the charging block camera stream silently into an app on my phone. At 2:51, the kitchen light flicked on. At 2:54, I heard, through the thin bedroom floor, the soft click of the back door. And on my phone screen, in grainy black and white night vision, I watched my husband open the back door of our house and let in a woman I recognized immediately, and a small boy, no older than 7, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big for him, his sneakers soaked through from the wet March grass. The woman's name was Valentina Marsh. I knew her name because I had heard it exactly once, 9 years earlier, in the early weeks of dating Desmond, when he mentioned an ex-girlfriend from before me, someone he described as complicated and a long time ago and nothing worth dwelling on. I had not thought about her in years. I certainly had never expected to watch her walk into my kitchen in the dead of night, while my husband hugged her the way you hug someone you have hugged 1,000 times before, easy and familiar. His hand resting on the boy's head as he said something I couldn't hear that made the child smile up at him with an expression I recognized instantly. Because I had seen that exact expression, that exact shape of trust, directed at me across a dinner table for 9 years. It was not a stranger's face looking at Desmond. It was a child who knew him. It was a child who loved him. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I watched the entire 11-minute exchange twice, then a third time, my thumb frozen over the replay button, my mind doing the math it did not want to do. 7 years old. Valentina Marsh. 9 years since Desmond called her a long time ago. The timeline did not require a forensic accountant to solve. It required arithmetic I could do in the dark, lying next to a man who had, at some point in the last decade, fathered a child with another woman and had spent every single day of our marriage, every anniversary, every Christmas morning, every ordinary Tuesday, choosing not to tell me. I want to describe what that discovery does to a person because I don't think people understand it until it happens to them. It is not simply heartbreak, though it is that too. It is a specific kind of vertigo, the sensation of your entire past retroactively rewriting itself in real time. Every memory I had of our marriage, every fight about money, every late night he claimed was a work emergency, every Saturday he said he was picking up extra hours, all of it now had a second, hidden meaning running underneath it like a current. And I could not stop myself from replaying 9 years of my life searching for all the places that current had been running, while I stood on the surface, oblivious, planning our anniversary trip and painting our bedroom trim. I did not confront him the next morning either. I know how that sounds, but I had learned enough about myself and about Desmond over the previous 2 nights to understand something crucial, that if I confronted him with nothing but suspicion and a description of what I'd glimpsed on a blurry camera, he would talk his way around it. He was good at that. He was good at making disasters sound like weather, the way some people just are, smooth and reasonable and endlessly plausible, and I was not going to hand him the chance to reframe this into something survivable before I understood the full shape of it myself. So instead, I did what I do for a living. I built a file. I saved every clip from both cameras onto a hard drive that lived in my studio, not our house. I went back through 9 years of joint bank statements, something Desmond had always handled with a breezy, "I've got the bills, don't worry about it," that I had once found endearing and now recognized as a door he had quietly kept closed. I found a Discover card statement, buried in a folder labeled Taxes 2019, with charges to a storage unit facility in Weaverville, a town 20 minutes north of us that I had never once had a reason to visit. I found, tucked behind old insurance paperwork in his filing cabinet, a folder with a name on the tab that made my hands go cold, Marsh. I opened it on a Thursday afternoon while Desmond was at a job site, and inside I found receipts, dozens of them, for children's clothing, pediatrician co-pays, a school registration form for a boy named Eli Marsh, and a handwritten note in Vienna's handwriting that I did not need a lawyer to interpret. "Thank you for always showing up for him even when you can't show up for us the way I wish you could. He is so lucky to have you as his dad." His dad. I sat on the floor of our home office for a long time after reading that, the folder open in my lap, listening to the house make its ordinary afternoon sounds, the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, the specific silence of a life that looked completely normal and was, underneath, something else entirely. I thought about every time Desmond had said he wanted kids someday, every time we had cried together after another failed round of trying, every time he had held me at 2 in the morning after a miscarriage and told me it would happen when it was supposed to happen, that we would be parents together when the timing was right. He already was a parent. He had been a parent for 7 years. He had simply chosen, deliberately, night after night, to let me grieve a child we didn't have while he fed and clothed and tucked in a child he did. I called my sister first, not my lawyer, because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind before I trusted myself to act on what I now knew. My sister's name is Odalise, and she has never once in her life minced words, and when I finished laying it out for her over the phone, her only response, after a long silence, was, "Ren, you need to call Harlan tomorrow morning, and you need to do it before you say one single word to Desmond. Do you understand me?" Harlan Cobb was our family's lawyer, a careful, unhurried man who had handled my grandmother's estate and, more recently, the operating agreement for Kessler and Rowe. I called him the next morning from my studio, with the door closed and Priscilla covering my client calls, and I told him everything. Harlan listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Renata," he said, "before we talk about the marriage, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Whose name is on the mortgage?" "Mine," I told him, "and Desmond's, both of ours, but the down payment had come almost entirely from an inheritance I received when my grandmother passed, money that had gone into an account before the wedding and had never technically been commingled the way the rest of our finances had." Harlan exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "That matters more than you know right now. I want you to gather everything you have, the footage, the bank statements, that folder, all of it, and I want you to do absolutely nothing that tips him off until we've talked again. Do not confront him. Do not ask him a single leading question. Just live your life for one more week and let me build the picture." That week was the longest of my life. I went to work. I sat in client meetings discussing paint palettes and custom cabinetry while carrying, underneath my ribs, a piece of information large enough to end everything I had built with another human being over 9 years. I came home every evening and made conversation with a man who fed a secret child at 3 in the morning, and then climbed back into bed beside me with the untroubled ease of someone who had done this so many times, the guilt no longer registered as guilt, just as routine. I watched him more closely than I have ever watched anyone in my life, and the thing that broke my heart the most, more than the affair, more than the child, was how easy it clearly was for him. He was not a man racked with hidden torment. He was a man who had built 2 separate rooms in his life and had simply, calmly, walked between them for years without ever once feeling the walls close in. On the 5th night of that week, I went back through the camera footage from months earlier, the archived clips I had pulled before I deleted the app's cloud storage to keep Desmond from ever noticing an unfamiliar login. I found a clip from the previous December, 2 nights before Christmas, where Vienna arrived not with grocery bags in mind, but with an envelope, which she handed to Desmond in the kitchen, and I watched him open it, and I watched his face change, soften in a way I recognized because I had seen that exact tenderness turned toward me 100 times. Inside the envelope, held up just long enough for the low-resolution camera to catch it, was a child's drawing, a stick figure family, 3 people holding hands under a crayon sun, with the words Dad, Mom, and Eli written in careful 7-year-old handwriting above each figure. My husband stood in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, 12 nights before he sat across from me on Christmas morning, and told me, with tears in his eyes, how much he wished we could give each other the family we both wanted, and held a drawing that told me he already had one. I did not scream, I did not throw anything. I sat in my studio with my headphones in, watching a 9-second video clip of a stick figure family. And I felt something inside me go very quiet and very clear, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm breaks, not calm exactly, but still, in the way that stillness sometimes precedes the most decisive action a person can take. Harlan and I met again that Saturday at his office on a weekend, because he understood by then that this could not wait for business hours. He had pulled every joint account, every line of credit, every asset with both our names on it, and he laid it out for me across his desk, the way Martin once laid out forged signatures for a woman named Emma Carter in a story I would later read and recognize every single beat of. There was a home equity line of credit Desmond had opened 18 months earlier that I had never signed for, and when Harlan compared the signature to my actual one, very clearly had never authorized. $41,000 had been drawn against it in irregular increments over that year and a half, and every single withdrawal correlated, almost to the day, with an expense in the Marsh folder. School tuition deposits, a used minivan titled in Vienna's name, a security deposit on an apartment in Weaverville. My husband had been financing an entire second household using equity stolen from a house I had built with my grandmother's money, using a signature that was not mine, and calling it, I imagine, in whatever quiet corner of his conscience he kept for justification, taking care of his responsibilities. Here is what I want you to understand, Harlan said, sliding a legal pad across the desk toward me. You have 3 separate things happening here, and they are not the same fight. You have a marriage that has been unfaithful, which is a personal betrayal and gives you full grounds for divorce in this state regardless of fault statutes. You have a financial fraud, a forged signature on a HELOC, which is a civil matter and potentially a criminal one, depending on how aggressively you want to pursue it. And you have a child, an innocent 7-year-old boy, who did not ask to be born into this and who deserves, whatever happens between you and Desmond, to not become collateral damage in it. I nodded, and Harlan continued. My advice is this. Move on the financial protection immediately this week quietly, freeze what you can freeze, document what you can document, and decide, before you say a single word to your husband, exactly what outcome you want, because the moment you confront him, he will start managing you instead of answering you, and I want you 3 steps ahead of that before it starts. I did exactly that. On Monday morning, I went to our bank alone, and using the authority I had as a joint account holder, moved half of the funds in our shared savings into a new account in my name only, an account Desmond did not know existed, at a credit union across town where I had banked before we married. I contacted the HELOC lender and reported the unauthorized signature, initiating a fraud investigation that would freeze the line of credit within 72 hours. I changed the passwords on every account that touched my design business, protecting Kessler and Rowe from any claim he might later try to make against marital assets, since the firm had been founded before our marriage and existed under a separate operating agreement, Priscilla, and I had drawn up years earlier out of nothing more than good business sense. And I made a copy of every piece of evidence, the footage, the bank statements, the Marsh folder, and gave a full duplicate set to Harlan for safekeeping, because I had learned enough about my husband in the previous 10 days to know that if he sensed the walls closing in, he would try to make evidence disappear before he tried to make amends. I confronted him on a Thursday evening, 11 days after I first saw that access log in a parking lot. I chose a Thursday deliberately, because Thursdays were his gym night, and I wanted him walking into the conversation without the adrenaline of a long work day already running through him, and I wanted, selfishly, one more ordinary morning with the version of my marriage I still, despite everything, some small foolish part of me was grieving. He came home at 7:15, gym bag over his shoulder, and found me sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where he had packed grocery bags for another family a dozen times over the previous year, with the hard drive, a printed folder of bank statements, and a laptop open to a paused frame of night vision footage in front of me. I watched his face when he saw it. I have thought about that face more times than I can count in the months since, because it told me everything about the kind of man I had spent 9 years married to. He did not look confused. He did not ask what any of it was. He looked, instantly and unmistakably, like a man who had always known this day was coming and had simply hoped, the way people hope about whether they cannot control, that it would arrive some other year, to some other version of himself, later, always later. Renata, he said, and his voice already had that practiced softness in it, the tone he used on subcontractors who'd made a costly mistake, the tone designed to make the person on the other end feel like the reasonable one for staying calm. "Let me explain. You have a son," I said. I did not raise my voice. I had promised myself in the 11 days of preparation that I would not give him the version of me that screamed, because I understood, watching that camera footage over and over, that screaming was a script he already knew how to survive. Calm was not. "His name is Eli. He is 7 years old. His mother is Vienna Marsh, and you have been letting them into our house, into our kitchen, at 3 o'clock in the morning, for at least the last 18 months, using groceries I paid for and money you stole from our home equity line by forging my signature." Desmond set his gym bag down very slowly, the way you set down something heavy when your arms have started shaking. "It's not what you think," he said. "Then tell me what it is," I said. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you built an entire second family and hid them in the walls of the first one." He sat down across from me, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, and I watched something collapse behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly. Guilt would have come with an apology attached, but something closer to exhaustion, the specific exhaustion of a man who had finally run out of rooms to hide in. "Vienna and I were together right before you," he said finally. "It ended badly. I didn't know about Eli until he was almost 2. She didn't tell me at first because she was scared of what it would do to us, to everything. By the time she did tell me, you and I were already engaged, and I panicked, Ren. I told myself I'd figure out how to tell you, and then the wedding happened, and then years happened, and every year that passed made it harder to imagine saying it out loud, because the longer I waited, the more it would look exactly like what it was." "What it was," I repeated. "Say it, don't make me say it for you." "A lie," he said quietly, "a 9-year lie. I want to tell you that I felt something enormous in that moment, some catastrophic collapse, but the truth is I mostly felt tired, the specific tiredness of a person who has spent 11 days holding a full glass of water perfectly steady and is finally allowed to set it down." "Does Vienna know you're married?" I asked, though I already knew part of the answer from the footage, from the ease with which she had walked into my kitchen like it was an arrangement long since normalized. "She's known for years," he said, and something in his voice cracked slightly. "I told her early on. I told her you and I that things were complicated between us, that I was staying for financial reasons, that I was planning to leave eventually and just needed the right time." He looked up at me then, and for the first time that night there was real fear in his face, not fear of losing me, I understood later, but fear of hearing himself say these things out loud to the one person he had spent 9 years making sure never heard them. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds," I said, "exactly like what it is." We sat in that kitchen for another 2 hours. He cried at one point, and I watched him cry with a strange, distant clarity, the way you watch weather through a window, close enough to see clearly but no longer close enough to get wet. He told me he loved me. He told me he loved Vienna too, in a different way, and he told me he loved Eli more than he had ever expected to love anyone. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I realized he was not confessing to me so much as finally, after 9 years, allowing himself to say his whole life out loud in one room instead of splitting it carefully between 2. It was, in its own way, a relief for him. It was, in mine, the end of everything. "What happens now?" he asked near midnight, his voice hoarse from talking. "Now," I said, "you move out. Tonight, if you can, tomorrow at the latest. I have already spoken with a lawyer. The HELOC fraud is being investigated by the lender independently of anything I decide to do personally, which means that part is no longer entirely in my hands or yours. I am filing for divorce. And you are going to tell Vienna the truth about what's happening, all of it, because that woman and that little boy deserve better than finding out secondhand that their entire arrangement with you is collapsing." He nodded, and for a moment I saw something almost like relief cross his face, the relief of a man finally being told the decision that had been too heavy for him to make himself. He packed a bag that night and left for a coworker's spare room, and I sat alone in the house we had built together, in the kitchen, where I had once painted the trim myself, and I did not cry the way I expected to. I sat very still at that table until the sun came up, and I thought, more than anything, about a 7-year-old boy named Eli who had spent his whole short life being smuggled into a house through a back door at 3 in the morning like something to be hidden. And I felt underneath all of my own grief, a fierce and unexpected protectiveness toward a child who was not mine and never would be, but who had never once asked to be anyone's secret. The weeks that followed moved with the strange, procedural quiet that follows any earthquake. The HELOC lender's fraud investigation confirmed within 10 days that my signature had been forged, and the line of credit was frozen and eventually closed entirely, with Desmond solely liable for the outstanding balance, since Harlan had built an airtight case establishing I had never authorized so much as a single draw. Because the house's down payment had come from my grandmother's inheritance and had never been commingled, and because Harlan had, with characteristic foresight, insisted years earlier that I keep meticulous documentation of that inheritance for tax purposes, the equity split in the divorce fell overwhelmingly in my favor. I kept the house. I kept Kessler and Rowe entirely, since it had been formed before the marriage and protected under its own operating agreement. Desmond kept his truck, his tools, and a mountain of legal fees he had entirely brought upon himself. Vienna called me once, about 3 weeks after that Thursday night, her number appearing on my phone as an unknown Weaverville area code that I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice was small and careful, the voice of someone who has rehearsed an apology so many times it no longer sounds natural. "I know I have no right to call you," she said, and I told her honestly that she probably didn't, and she accepted that without argument the way I imagine a person does when they've spent a long time expecting exactly that response. She told me she hadn't known, at first, that Desmond was still telling me he wanted to leave, that as the years went on she had started to suspect the truth but had let herself believe him anyway because believing him was easier than raising a son alone. "I'm not calling to defend myself," she said. "I'm calling because Eli keeps asking why Desmond hasn't come by, and I don't know what to tell a 7-year-old, and some small, stupid part of me thought maybe you'd have more grace about this than I deserve." I did not have an easy answer for her. I still don't, entirely. But I told her the truth, which was that whatever anger I carried belonged to Desmond, not to a child who had never had a say in any of it, and that I hoped, for Eli's sake, that his father found a way to finally show up for him honestly instead of secretly, in daylight instead of at 3 in the morning, without a wife on the other side of a locked bedroom door who didn't know he existed. She cried on the phone, and I let her. And when we hung up, I sat with the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having extended something like grace to a woman who had, in her own way, also been lied to for years by the same man, just from the other side of a wall he had built between us both. I moved through the following months the way you move through any structural repair, slowly, methodically, replacing one damaged beam at a time. I went to therapy for the first time in my life, not because I felt broken exactly, but because I understood that a person who spent 11 days building a legal case against her own husband before allowing herself to feel a single unguarded emotion about it probably owed herself some space to finally feel those emotions somewhere safe. I repainted the kitchen, the actual kitchen, the site of the crime as I came to call it privately, a deep, warm green that had nothing to do with the version of that room I had lived in before, and I replaced the back door entirely, not because the old one was broken, but because I never wanted to look at it again and see, underneath the paint, the ghost of a hand that had opened it 100 times in secret. Priscilla, my business partner, became something closer to family in those months than she had ever been before, showing up with takeout on nights she somehow always knew were bad ones, sitting with me through the parts of the divorce paperwork that made my hands shake too badly to hold a pen steady. Odalise flew in from Chicago twice, once right after I found the drawing, and once for the day the divorce was finalized, and both times she said almost nothing, just sat with me, because some griefs don't need commentary, they need company. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that Tuesday afternoon in the parking lot. It was quiet, procedural, almost anticlimactic after everything that had led up to it, a signature on a page in Harlan's office, no dramatic quarto. Scene, no raised voices, just 2 people who had once built a life together formally agreeing to stop pretending they still were. Desmond did not contest the division of assets. His lawyer, a tired-looking man who I suspect understood exactly how weak his client's position was, advised him not to, and Desmond, for what it's worth, took that advice without a fight. He looked, on the day we signed the papers, smaller than I remembered him, not physically, but in some essential way, like a man whose careful architecture of secrets had finally been dismantled and had nothing left standing in its place. I heard, secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance months later, that Desmond had moved to Weaverville and taken a smaller job managing residential renovations. Closer to Eli, closer to Vienna, though whether he and Vienna had rebuilt anything resembling a relationship or simply co-parented at a careful distance, I never learned and never asked. I heard that he saw Eli every weekend now, in daylight, at soccer games and birthday parties, the kind of ordinary visible fatherhood he had denied that little boy for 7 secret years. I hope that part is true. Whatever anger I still carry toward Desmond, and I do still carry some, I have never once wished ill on that child, who deserved, from the very beginning, a father who wasn't a stranger sneaking through a back door at 3 a.m. As for me, I rebuilt the parts of my life that mattered most, one deliberate choice at a time. Kessler and Rowe grew that year, ironically, the way businesses sometimes do, when the person running them finally stops leaving pieces of herself scattered across someone else's secrets. Priscilla and I landed our biggest client yet, a boutique hotel renovation downtown, and I threw myself into that work with the kind of focus I hadn't had in years. Because for the first time in a long time, every hour I spent building something belonged entirely and only to me. I started running again, something I'd abandoned somewhere in the fog of the last few years of my marriage without ever quite noticing I'd stopped. And I found, on quiet mornings along the Swannanoa River, a version of peace that didn't depend on anyone else's honesty but my own. I still have the hard drive Harlan helped me build, the one with all the footage and the statements and that photograph of a stick figure family under a crayon sun. I keep it in a drawer, not out of any lingering need for it. The divorce is long settled, and there is nothing left to prove, but because I have learned something in the past year that I did not fully understand before all of this happened. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. They do not deserve to be erased. I do not open that drawer often. But I know it's there, the way you know a scar is there even after it stopped hurting. A record of the exact moment I stopped being a woman who trusted by default and became a woman who verifies, who documents, who protects what's hers before anyone else gets the chance to quietly take it from her at 3 o'clock in the morning while she sleeps. People ask me sometimes, when I tell an abbreviated version of this story, whether I regret installing those cameras, whether some part of me wishes I had never opened that access log in the first place and simply kept living inside the comfortable version of my marriage I'd believed in for 9 years. The honest answer is no, not for a single second. Not knowing would not have protected me. It would only have protected him. And I have come to believe that the truth, however brutal its arrival, is never actually the thing that destroys a life. It's the only thing that ever gives you the chance to rebuild one honestly. The lie was the wrecking ball. The truth was just the crew that finally showed up to clear the wreckage so something real could be built in its place. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever discovered a betrayal hiding in plain sight, buried in something as small and ordinary as an appliance log or a bank statement? What would you have done in my place? And if you enjoy true stories about betrayal, resilience, and the quiet, deliberate work of rebuilding a life on your own terms, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.